Welcome back to Home Field Trivia. Thanks for joining us for our Jaguars quiz. Like and subscribe for more content. Leave a comment below and let us know how we're doing. The Jacksonville Jaguars were founded in 1993 and began play in 1995. That is true. The Jaguars won their first Super Bowl in 1999. That is false. Fred Taylor is the Jaguars' all-time leading rusher. That is true. Urban Meyer coached the Jaguars for 2 full seasons. That is false. Mark Brunell was the starting quarterback when the Jaguars reached the AFC Championship in 1996. That is true. The Jaguars have retired the jersey number of Fred Taylor. That is false. Tony Baselli was the first player ever drafted by the Jaguars. That is true. Byron Leftwich was the first round draft pick by the Jaguars in 2003. That is true. The Jaguars' all-time sack leader is Calais Campbell. That is false. Maurice Jones-Drew once led the NFL in rushing yards. That is true. Blake Bortles was drafted 3rd overall by the Jaguars in 2014. That is true. The Jaguars franchise was announced alongside the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That is false. Tony Baselli is the Jaguars' only Hall of Famer so far. That is true. Jimmy Smith is the Jaguars' all-time leader in receiving yards. That is true. Leonard Fournette was drafted 4th overall by Jacksonville in 2017. That is true. The Jaguars have hosted regular season games in London almost every year since 2013, except 2020. That is true. The Jaguars' first playoff berth came in 2007. That is false. Calais Campbell was named to the Pro Bowl during his time with the Jaguars. That is true. The Jaguars' 2017 playoff run ended in the AFC Championship against the Patriots. That is true. Blake Bortles is the Jaguars' all-time leader in passing yards. That is false. The Jaguars made the AFC Championship game in just their 2nd season. That is true. Trevor Lawrence was drafted number 1 overall by the Jaguars in 2021. That is true. The Jaguars have appeared in 4 AFC Championship games. That is false. The Jaguars were purchased by Shahid Khan in 2012. That is true. Doug Marrone coached the Jaguars to the AFC Championship game in the 2017 season. That is true. The Jaguars have played in the NFC South since their founding. That is false. The Jaguars' first winning season came in 1999. That is false. Tony Baselli was the first Jaguar inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That is true. The Jaguars won their first playoff game against the Buffalo Bills. That is true. The Jaguars' home stadium is called Everbank Stadium. That is true. Thanks for joining us at Home Field Trivia for our Jaguars quiz. Like and subscribe for more content, and leave a comment below, and join us again next time.